with the advancement of AI, the deepfake have become so realistic that even a seasoned person, someone who is in the technology space, someone who sees this on a daily basis, even they can't tell between what is deepfake and what is real. I mean, you can have a leader say something through a deepfake video, even if you deny that later or even if you debunk that, the harm is already done, right? Because people do form an opinion based on what they see. We have seen deepfakes being used in the US and India to shape public opinion, but also it is being used to troll and abuse people. I can give an example from India. Mob lynching is a real thing. Like, for example, during my time at Twitter, I noticed that some fake video would circulate, and I think it was the pre-deepfake times where they would misuse a video from one context to the other context.
Welcome to FO Talks. My name is Catherine Lapie, and today I am joined by Manish Maheshwari. For those tuning in for the first time, Fair Observer is an independent nonprofit media platform that brings together a global network of experts and citizens to make sense of the world. We strive to include a wide array of perspectives from around the world and make sure that these are fact-checked and well-reasoned. And today we are very grateful to be joined by Manish. So Manish, you are a former Twitter India Managing Director and AI entrepreneur, and currently a Mason Fellow at Harvard Kennedy School. You're focused in AI governance and digital public goods, and you're also the founder of Fannery AI and work in venture capital. I'd love to hear if you want to introduce yourself a little bit more to our viewers, tell us a little bit more about yourself, and then we can get started with the interview and conversation on deepfakes.
Yeah, no, Catherine, my pleasure to be on this talk with you. In fact, you covered most of the things in my background pretty well. And yeah, I mean, I used to run Twitter in India some time back until it was acquired by Elon. I also did a startup in the area of creator economy, an AI startup. And after I sold it, I was a fellow at Harvard, really focusing on AI and public policy and the evolving landscape of, AI regulations as well. So yeah, happy to be on this show with you and happy to share my perspective. There's a lot going on in the AI world, particularly around AI generated content and its impact on democracy, its impact on, how people perceive truth and how it affects narrative building. So there's a lot to discuss on this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So you wrote for the Fair Observer about deepfakes. And I'd love to kick off the interview with you maybe giving our viewers some background on just some basic questions of what is a deepfake, why should people care about this in terms of India, but then also outside of India right now. And then additionally, how bad would you say the deepfake problem is in India specifically or globally? Are we talking about like a few viral videos, a systemic threat? Could you give us a little bit of a background on what the issues over there are?
Yeah, no, good. I think let's start from the basics, right? So in a very simple layman's term, right, deepfake is something which is synthetically prepared. It's not, the actual thing, but it is presented and portrayed as something real, right? And that's where the problem is, right? You can have something synthetically made, and if you properly disclose it and let people know that it is not real, that's okay, because that is seen more as a creative liberty, right? The problem occurs when you produce something with the real intent, with the intent to pass it off as something real, with a view to misinform someone, cause some harm, and the person who is on the audience side doesn't really know. And the problem is not just about the fact that they see something and they believe it. The problem is reverse as well, that when they see something real, they don't believe it. So even the truth becomes questionable, right? And I think if you think about the societies we exist in, we make decisions, we form our opinion based on some shared reality, right? And deepfake, cuts across everything and impacts the core of that shared reality, because you as a recipient or the audience then doesn't know what needs to be believed and what cannot be believed, and therefore it impacts people's perception. It influences people in a way that is not conducive. Now, Deepfake is not an India-specific problem. It's a transnational problem. We are seeing it almost in every country. Different countries are at different levels of sophistication, and also depends on which audience is looking at it. But with the advancement of AI, the deepfake have become so realistic that even a seasoned person, someone who is in the technology space, someone who sees this on a daily basis, even they can't tell between what is deepfake and what is real picture, real video. And it impacts elections for sure, because I mean you can have a leader say something through a deepfake video. Even if you deny that later, or even if you debunk that, the harm is already done, right? Because people do form an opinion based on what they see, and once the opinions are formed, it is very difficult to undo that, right? That's one. We have seen deepfakes being used in the US, in India, to shape public opinion, but also it is being used to troll and abuse people, right? I mean, if you think about it, if you want to be revengeful against someone, particularly that happens a lot with people who are sort of being bullied by a certain set of people. Content can be produced which sort of completely shatters their character, their personality, and it is very difficult to undo that. So there has to be some way to build some standards and some way to, first of all, identify those things, and also when a harm has been done, a way to find where it originated, and a mechanism to not only correct it but also provide right kind of penalty so that you can prevent it from happening in future. I mean,
Yeah.
I can give an example from India. Mob lynching is a real thing. Like, for example, during my time at Twitter, I noticed that some fake video would circulate. And I think it was the pre-deepfake times where they would misuse a video from one context to the other context. But I see that today, they don't even have to do that. They can produce something synthetically and pass it off saying, okay, this is really happening, and then get people, angry about it and start, charge against someone else. And, that can be a real problem.
Would you say that there's like a fundamental difference between a deepfake and then just other historical examples of defamation and fake news and things of that nature? I know that you've said that deepfakes aren't just a fake news problem and rather they're a fake reality problem. Is the difference there that they're just so much more believable and it's hard to falsify them, or is there something special going on with the fact that they're synthetically AI made?
So there are two problems, right? One is they are as good as real. So unless you have some kind of a framework and some kind of a provenance tool and some kind of metadata or some kind of declaration, it's very difficult to figure out what is real and what is fake, right? The second problem is that they can be produced at scale, and that's a real problem. You can produce with a click of a button, and that makes it very easy for even bad actors to do something. The cost of production is almost zero. The cost of finding out and correcting is significant. So it alters the economics and dynamics in a way that it is really dangerous. This was not true earlier, because when you were producing something which was a fake news, it had limited harm and it could be easily identified, and proper steps could have been taken, not immediately, but in due course, right? Today, the problem is it's happening there are billions of deepfakes out there, right? So how do you even, get a handle around it? Unless you establish some standards, you force companies to have certain declarations from the creators, you have a way to prove provenance, you have auditability. Those kind of things have to be put in place. And I think people are figuring that out. Governments are figuring that out. Even industry bodies are figuring that out as to what is the right way to steer it, right? I mean, no one wants to put a brake to this. It's like, if you stop everything, you're putting a brake. What you want to do is provide the right steering wheel and provide the guardrail so that you can benefit from the innovation, because a deepfake can also be used for marketing. For example, if you're a small business owner and you want to have creative for your website, you don't have to actually go and shoot, right? Like whatever your product is or whatever your catalog is, you can actually, with a click of a button, you can create an image which is as good as real, and you can populate your website, and that really cuts down the cost of marketing or awareness creation for a small business owner. You can
So is that
convert.
fake though, or is that just an AI generated advertisement?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I go back to my definition, right? It's not reality for sure, but then the intent there is not to harm someone and pass it off as reality, right? As long as you are clear about that. Because
Okay, so the intention there is the differentiating factor. Yeah.
yeah, because as a technology is doesn't have a value system per se, right? I mean, there's no
Right.
morality in the technology tools. Like the morality is with the person who is using it. So if the intent is to harm someone and pass something as real with the intent to cause disruption or misinform someone, then I would put that as a deep fake that needs to be regulated or sort of managed. But if you are doing it to for benign needs or for cutting down the cost of production of something, you can pass it off by saying that okay, this is a legitimate use and we should allow this kind of innovation to happen. But there's a fine line. The intent really
Okay,
matters.
but so just to be clear, that's also considered a deep fake. That's just maybe not one that's morally reprehensible, or is
Yeah,
that
I
just a
mean,
totally different
yeah, I won't
category?
call it a deepfake. I would say that it's a digital image. That's what I would say. It's a digital
Okay.
image, right? What's a deepfake is like you are passing something fake as real. That's where I would make the difference.
Okay, I see. So
Yeah.
the deep fake has um an air of deception fundamentally entwined to it. Okay, interesting.
Yes.
So could you also walk us through what the Indian government's draft amendments proposed, as well as any updates that you know about since you wrote on this in early November? Because I believe there was like kind of a planning period and revision period that closed in early December. So if there are any updates on that that you could elucidate, that would also be great.
Yeah. So I'll give you a bit of a high level, and maybe
Perfect.
I am not fully aware of the latest updates, but I can tell you that, see, Government of India made a very good initiative to say they proposed some regulations, right, around synthetic media, and they asked people to provide comments, right? So what they are not doing is they are not doing censorship. They are not saying that you can't do it. But what they are saying is that we need a mechanism or a standard to figure out how to separate the fact from fabrication, right? So what they said was, anything that is synthetically generated content, it has to has disclaimers covering at least 10% of an image or the first 10% of an audio clip. And large platforms, and they have a different separate category for them, platform which has over 5 million users, they need to deploy automated detection tools and collect declarations identifying which media is AI generated, right? And they have given this out as a proposal or a draft, and they are expecting people to come back with their comments. Now, what is interesting here is that this approach is a very democratic and sort of very thoughtful and a measured approach. I'll tell you why. Because if you compare with what is happening in other economies, right? If you think about, say EU, right? EU is very much like rights first and very compliance heavy regime, right? When it comes to AI governance. On the other hand, if you look at US is much more of a market-led and voluntary mechanism. And if I look at China is very state-controlled coercive mechanism. But what India is, the path that India is taking, it's saying we will have a trust-based governance. And it is important because in a noisy pluralistic democracy, having understanding of what is truth is very important because it can really have a catastrophic impact if people not only get persuaded into believing something, but even bigger problem if they stop believing what is even real because everything can be dismissed as fake, and that can really impact your elections. It can impact public's view on government's programs, things like that, right? So if I were to read between the lines, they have I would say propose something called truth sovereignty, right? So it's not about where the data is residing, or it's not about like who's controlling what, but how do we even decide what is authentic? What is the framework? What's the standard? And they are proposing those things. I don't think it has come out and become a law. It is out there for people to comment. I think the article I wrote is similarly how other people are also commenting on it. And I think the government will, my view is government will take these views into account and come back with a proper regulation, right? So that's where I would pause and get your
Okay, yeah. Totally. That is definitely in keeping with the research I did in preparation for this call. I haven't seen any major updates. And I think it's also an interesting strategy to put out a doctrine and then kind of see how the public is reacting to it, which definitely helps support the idea that it's built on, or that it's a doctrine built on kind of honesty and trust. I would be curious if you have any thoughts about how the implementation of that might play out, um, particularly, and you've suggested that, or an idea of like tiered accountability. So I'd be curious if you have initial thoughts on, yeah, how the enforcement might play out. If we go back to our example of the small business owner versus a large corporation, what the differences there might look like. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll come to the difference in small business and large corporations. But see, the way to think about this is that where something is being consumed by millions of people and it has a real danger of causing problem, I think we need to provide some kind of a guardrails, right? It's no different in my view that think about the consumer protection norms in the food industry, right? When food starts getting produced at an industry scale, you know, people initially did not know how to distinguish between, say, milk or watered milk or, say, butter or chemicals. So the government stepped in and say, okay, here are the regulations. Here is how you have to label the content. Here is what you have to disclose. And if you're a manufacturer of a certain size, you have to use this kind of packaging with this kind of a disclosure so that a consumer can then figure out what to trust and what not to trust and can make an informed choice. So I think a similar analogy can be, can be viewed in the case of deepfake, where if you are producing something at scale on a platform which is mass consumed, it is the responsibility to clarify what exactly is that content, right? Who is producing it? What is the origin of that content? And if it is real or AI generated, then somehow disclose that so that people know what is AI generated. And then, if it causes any problem, there has to be some kind of an audit trail or some way to go back to the origin and take action against the wrongdoer or the bad actor, right? That's what it is. Now, large corporation, which is small business, the difference also in small business is that the impact is very limited. If you put a digitally created image on your website, it is far less damaging because very few people will see it. And, as long as your intent is not to deceive someone, I think I would be okay with that, right? On the other hand, if you are putting a very deceptive content on social media with a view to mislead people into believing that some person who is saying something is actually true when in fact that person never said that, and that can impact their political standing, their character, and they are a very public figure, then it has a real problem because not only you can influence their thinking about this person, but tomorrow that person says something for real, you won't even believe that, right? Because you won't know whether to trust that person or not. And that's the real thing. Yeah, that's a real problem.
Yeah, and also I think a big concern is just regarding timing. So, for example, right before an election, if you put out a deep fake, it doesn't matter if you're just an individual actor. If that happens 24 hours before an election and you're able to swing something and there isn't enough time to discredit it, the damage is already done. And at that point, it doesn't really even matter where it's coming from, large actor or big actor, or large actor or small actor. But yeah, I'd love if you could talk a little bit more about your idea of verification infrastructure. You've wrote a bit about how a provenance framework akin to the Aadhaar authenticity in India might be a promising structure. If you could first give a little bit of context on what the Aadhaar authenticity structure is in India for our viewers outside of India who might not know about that, and then also how you think that would play out, that would be great. I'm personally interested in terms of any sort of authenticity structure, how one can ensure that that wouldn't just also be faked, but maybe I'm just missing some sort of technical step that is actually pretty simple in terms of creating that verification.
Yeah, so I'll talk a bit about Aadhaar for people who are outside India. So Aadhaar is a biometrics-based identity mechanism, right? So there are two things very unique about Aadhaar that makes it unique in the history of this planet. One is it is done at scale. 1 billion plus people are authenticated via Aadhaar, and that's a scale that no other country or never in the history we have seen. And second is it is biometric based, which is basically the system has your iris scan and your fingerprints. So your identity can be proven simply not based simply on your face and fingers, right? I mean, you are your own identity. You don't need another identity card or some kind of a document to carry with yourself. And that really plays out when you think about how India has been able to provide financial services to people in the villages and people who may also not be very comfortable reading or writing, because what you need is simply you need to show up, and I think you can prove that it's you, and services can be rendered to you. It works really well when you go to an airport. You don't need to carry a boarding card. There is something called DigiYatra in India, which is based on Aadhaar system. You can just show up at the counter and they will scan your face and they know that it's you. So it has really turbocharged the whole the system of getting things done and building trust around who a particular person is, right? And it also, because you reduce the friction in authentication or verification of a person, you can do a lot more things that you could not do earlier. For example, providing financial services, which I gave, right? Now, when it comes to content, we don't have a similar system. When a content is seen on a social media, we don't know where it is coming from, who is actually producing it, and whether it is real or it is fake, right? So we have to think from the perspective of how we may have solved this problem in other areas. For example, if you think about counterfeit or currencies, right? Today, how do you decide whether a currency note is fake or true? There is some kind of a system where you know that the paper and the way it is printed, but more important than that, it has some kind of a digital or some kind of a watermark inside it. And also there is a system of trust that you know that who is the issuer of that, right? And that's what builds trust, that I know the issuer, I know that there is a watermark which can prove where it is originating from, who is creating it. So something similar, I think, is what is required for content as well. Some kind of a way to label it, some way to also prove provenance based on some kind of a digital watermark. And that is on the inside of the content, but on the surface of it for the user facing, some kind of a disclaimer or some kind of a notice saying that what you are about to see or what you're seeing is actually digitally created, right? So I'm not saying that we all have a perfect system, but we have to start with creating those standards and putting it out in the public and see how people react to it, because over a period of time, user behavior will also adjust. The creators of content will also learn from this, and the good actors will gradually surface to the top, and the bad actors will fade into oblivion because they'll be deterred from doing something which is not correct, right? Now, what has happened? You also asked me what has happened since the government of India, published those norms to get feedback. So it is now gradually moving towards the formalized rule amendments that define and regulate synthetic media. That's what they're trying to do. And there's a strong push for labeling and platform accountability to combat misinformation and disinformation. So there is a lot of push, which I'm sensing, is that this kind of content has to be labeled. And if you're a significant platform, which means that you have more than 5 million users, there is added responsibility for the platform to ensure this happens. I think that's where things are. This is a first in the world, in my view, because I think other countries have not done something similar. So if India is able to do this, it's also signaling that India has its own digital sovereignty, and it will decide its own course of action, because there's a large population. It's a very bustling economy. There is close to 900 million, mobile phone users. I think so. There's a social and local need to get ahead of this thing before it becomes a real problem and start disrupting the way people perceive reality in India.
Yeah. If you could walk me through a little bit more what an invisible but verifiable signature might look like. And I know we don't have a perfect answer to that, and it might be really hard to get a perfect answer. We might never, and that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. Just thinking about the examples that you've given in terms of watermarks on cash, for example, the first thing that came to my mind is a lot of places, at least in the US, won't even accept hundreds, and that's kind of all you get. And after that, you need a check or you need to pay by card or do a bank transfer. And so, yes, there are watermarks on $100 bills. And again, I don't really know what the situation in India is like with regard to cash currency. But in my mind, an outcome of really advanced counterfeit cash forgery is just that people use less cash, fewer places accept complete cash payments for high ticket items, and the way that we kind of decrease counterfeit is by accepting less and less of cash payment. That's at least what comes to mind as the way that cultural norms have shifted around that. I wonder if something similar will happen just to make videos obsolete. And I guess that is kind of the concern that you've been airing, that deepfakes have the potential to make real, true, legitimate videos uncertain in the eyes of the public. But to go back to my original question, if you have any other thoughts or ways that you could explain how an invisible but verifiable signature would work for someone who might not.
Sure. I might get a bit technical, so I'll try to also explain through analogies, right? So when I say, what is technically possible is like, see, an invisible verifiable signature is like a cartographic proof embedded inside content that tells you where it came from, how it was created, and whether it has been altered without changing how it looks, right? So there has to be, it's a mechanism to do that, and that's very doable, given that we are talking about...
and that, like, is really difficult to fake. Like, a good deep fake wouldn't just be able to fake that.
Yeah, because it is not about how, like, it will look as a real, but the way it is created, the platforms may require that every content needs to have this cartographic proof or some kind of an embedded signature before something is uploaded. It's like a metadata in a picture. Like, for example, when you take a picture from your phone, it has metadata about where it was taken, which device it was taken from. And if you alter that, it becomes known to people that it has been altered. So, it will become it will become clear to the platforms where it is uploaded, or to people who understand this technicality, that this is not a real thing, this is an altered one. Of course, a lay person will not understand this, but when it comes to a situation where a crime has been committed, and when you look at the audit trail and the proof, you can figure out that, oh, at this point in the chain, this image or this video was altered, and therefore this is fake now, right? So that is one. So let me explain, because it's difficult to put this point across. Let me explain with a few analogies, right? Think about a chip in your passport, right? So when you have a passport, you don't see the chip, but there is a chip inside it. And as a user of passport, you don't feel it, you don't know where it is. But when you are at the immigration, when you scan your passport and the person swipes the passport, they are able to read the chip, and the chip has information about you. So if you have altered the passport and you have put someone else's picture in place of your picture, or you have changed the details, the chip will tell you the truth, and the chip will say, okay, this is the reality, and if you see the passport is different from that, the person at the immigration will figure it out, right? That's what it is. Like, I'll give you a slightly more deeper example, right? There could be a cartographic hash of the content, which is a unique fingerprint. You can have a creator or a system signature, which will tell you who and what generated it. You can have a creation metadata, what time it was created, what method was used to create it, was it created by AI or by a camera? And also you can have a temper evident change. What temper evident change, in the sense that what changed, if anything, and at what point, right? So so critically, right? I mean, there are two things very critical here, crucially, right? I mean, so one is you cannot fake it after the fact, and you cannot alter the content without detection. If you fulfill those criteria, this system would work, right? So just to give you the flow, you also asked me, tell me a flow. What would the flow be, right? So what a normal user experiences is that they upload or share a video, the and say this upload something on Twitter or say Instagram, the platform automatically checks, number one, does this content have a valid signature? Second is the user sees a small signal. As a user, when I'm using Twitter or Instagram, I'll see a signature or small signal on the image, which will say, okay, it's a verified origin. Is it AI generated or not? And the source is known or unknown. That information is good enough for me to figure out how much do I believe it or trust it or not, right? So, and then on top of that, you can have authority, journalists, courts can run a deeper verification when some kind of adverse event has occurred. And at that point in time, they can compare the signature against trusted registries. They can see if edits were made and when. They can confirm provenance without relying on platform's word. So, but at the first level, the platform and the user, if they had given this information and they have this kind of a flow, a lot of deepfake will get curtailed, or at least even if they are there, you would know that they are deepfake, and you can then decide whether to believe it or not, right? I think one other analogy I can give you is, it's also technical, which is the HTTPS analogy, right? I mean, before HTTPS, you couldn't tell if a website was real or spoofed. Users were constantly phished. So what
Okay.
HTTPS did was it made authenticity machine verifiable. Most users don't understand certificates, but browsers do, right? So the similar parallel I can draw for deepfake is that invisible signatures are like HTTPS for media. Humans don't inspect them, but systems do, and systems automatically detect that at scale. And that's another analogy, because HTTPS was a system that was implemented because there's a big problem that a lot of fake websites were coming up, and people stopped trusting websites. They were not comfortable giving their credit card details. And
Yeah.
after HTTPS came, people became very comfortable sharing credit card data and doing payments online, which was not the case before, right? So that's a
Okay.
similar framework can be done for content as well.
Okay. Um, that's a promising example, because a concern that I was having was, even if you can do the perfect serial chip verifiability for deepfake situation, like even if we can perfect that, there's a difference between that being totally coherent and verifiable and the public believing that it is true and verifiable and trusting in that. And that gap there is what determines how truth and reality are morphing in the way that it functions in society. That example is really promising because it suggests that even if there's a delay or a period of time in which people become really skeptical of all videos, it can still be cleaned up in the advent of some better verifiability checking system. Because what I was going to ask you was, do you think that there's like a time crunch on this? Like, do you think that there's a point in which people become too skeptical of videos that you can't go back even with proper verifiability mechanisms? But I guess that example suggests that even if we get into this kind of period of time when people are really skeptical of all videos, there is a way to clean that up with a proper verification system. I guess another concern that I have is, again, even if like the science and the technology works and officials and platforms can totally iron out what's a deepfake, what's not, what camera it came from, all of that. A concern that I have is, from the perspective of the layman, there are so many steps removed. Like for me, a little check on a video might not be totally trust ensuring to me if I don't really understand how the mechanisms work. So what are your thoughts on the space between maybe courts and a registration system and big platforms being able to discern whether a video is a deepfake or not, and whether just an average person can A, trust that, or B, kind of understand for themselves whether something is a deepfake or not. And I ask that because one of your kind of suggestions or critiques on India's proposed like 10% rule and those modifications was about AI literacy and equipping citizens to better detect manipulation. So could you talk to me a little bit about how you see that playing out for the masses or for an average person who doesn't have a tech background and doesn't have access to all the data or reports / just doesn't want to go through that for like every single video that they come across?
Yeah. No, Catherine, you touched upon some very important points, and let me try to cover them one by one, right? One is you talked about this user behavior side of things, and which is a very important and absolutely critical, right? So even if something is technically possible and something the system can do, that doesn't mean that the people on the other side who are lay people and people who may not be very technically savvy, it will work for them. And I think in my mind, that is the part is the one where we will have to try a few things and see what works, right, with the people. It also requires a bit of an education and sort of taking them along. Now, a layperson or an end user need not understand every technicality. The only one or two things they have to understand is it real or fake, right? So if they're watching a video or looking at a picture, if they have a very quick and easy way to get a signal which tells them that this is real or this is AI generated, and if it's and what is the source, if that can be communicated in a very simple, easy way. And that's what the regulations are trying to propose, saying that there has to be a disclaimer, right, on a picture or a video. Now, if disclaimer is the best thing, that I don't know. And I think what is the shape and form of disclaimer, where it would appear, how you do it, that has to be figured out based on user behavior, and sort of when you test it in the market, you'll learn something about what people believe, how they believe those. And it's a very important aspect which you covered. And I'm thankful that you brought this up, because technology is there, but just the fact that technology is there doesn't solve the societal problem. You have to understand the society's makeup and how people look at it. That's one. Now, you also talk about time crunch and is the time is now. My personal belief is yes, the time is now, because if you look at your social media feeds these days, I personally am seeing so much bot generated and AI generated content, and many of them are funny, they're entertaining, and I don't mind them. But it is not very easy for me to figure out that, okay, if a speech by a political leader there, is that a real speech or it is altered, right? And that is real concern to me. And in my mind, whenever elections will happen in any country, any democratic country, those kind of content will really, skyrocket, because it's so easy to do it. And I think if you can easily do it just a day before the voting or 2 days before the voting, why would a bad actor won't do it? And we need to figure out a mechanism to stop that from happening, because that can be really devastating from the point of view of civic integrity, and also from the point of view of running a democracy. So that's what I would say. I think what else did you? So I think those are the things. I think we need to figure out the right way to send the right signal to the user in a way they understand, in a way which is not cognitively heavy for them to figure out. They just need to know, can I trust it or not? And that's the bottom line. Similar to like in the HTTPS era, only simple thing that was told to them that, oh, site which has HTTPS and a padlock sign, those are the sites where you can give your payments data. If something doesn't have a padlock and it is not HTTPS, your data is not encrypted, someone can, do bad things with your credit card information. As long as they understood that, and the industry gravitated towards that, because over time, every legitimate website had the HTTPS verification, right, over time. And even Google browser, if you are visiting a site that is not safe and doesn't have the HTTPS, the Google will tell you that, you are going to a risky website, your data is not safe. So that signal is good enough for me. So the browser is sort of the platforms, and the website makers are the content creators, and sort of the user giving the credit card data is the user. So I think if you look at the way this worked out in the website and the internet world, similar thing can work out in the content space as well. But it requires all three people to come together. One is, of course, the consumer protection laws and regulations to provide that steering wheel rather than putting a brake on it. and then platforms to sort of make sure that the system works well, at least on their platforms, and then the user be told in a very simple way what is right and what is not right, right? And and build that trust among them.
Yeah. I also wonder if perhaps an unintended positive consequence of skyrocketing deepfakes is that it puts more emphasis on fact checking and rigorous research and journalism that has a positive effect on reader due diligence, in that if people are checking a bit more for whether something is a deep fake or not, they're subconsciously and consciously going to be putting more effort into looking into whether a source is verifiable and whether that is going to have some sort of benefit effect for journalism and for truth and fact checking. I don't know if maybe that's just
Yeah, no, I
optimism.
think, Catherine, you touched on a very hot button. I'll tell you why it is a hot button, right? What you are saying in theory makes a lot of sense. But think about it. Fact checking has cost to it. Who will bear that cost? Number one. Where are the economics of that business, right? Second is, who is doing the fact checking and what is true? Who's going to decide what is true? Because when it is a data backed thing saying, oh, X number of people did this, and it can be, you can go to the source and verify it, that's still okay. But when there's a news item about opinion or something which is less about just pure facts, but also interpretation, then the person doing the fact checking, their own personal bias will also come into the picture, right? So it's both an economic problem in the sense that who will bear the cost? Is going to be the state sponsored? Is going to be like platform sponsored? And can you trust the state or the platform to do a fair work at it? Like they can you ensure fairness from their side?
Yeah.
Right. On the other hand, see, this proposed regulation is not trying to do that. What it is saying is that just declare what it is. And have a mechanism to audit the trail. That's all it is saying. So that bad actors will get exposed, good actors will surface to the top. A trust will be built because everyone knows what is real and what is fake. And the fake people can do their fake things, but no one will believe them, right? Just as in the website world, there are so many fake websites. But we know what is fake, or we at least don't go and put a credit card data on a fake website.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but no one is stopping from a person to create a fake website and try to get your personal details and your credit card data. So if you have a very clear mechanism of separating the wheat, like the good from the bad, the system will correct itself. Versus making a central authority in charge of the truth. Because when you make a central authority in charge of figuring out what is truth, first of all, there's a cost to doing that. And can you trust someone? Like, for example, in a more dictatorial regimes, like say China, right? I mean, China says this is true and it's top down. It's so the question is, they have their own agenda. They want to build a narrative that supports their thinking. So how would that work in a democratic setup where there are pluralistic views and people have multiple ways of looking at things? You cannot have a one central authority dictate the truth, right? So it's a tough problem. I'm not saying it's an easy one. I think, but what I'm proposing is that instead of opacity, have transparency, right? And let people know what is going on. If people are fully aware and things can be verified, the system improves over time. Because the good things surface to the top, and the bad things, the community figures out what is a bad thing, and they lose business, they don't get audience, they become, even if they are present, their presence doesn't matter.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
yeah,
that's a great point to end on, in my opinion. It'll be interesting to see how this draft plays out for the Indian government from the perspective of the whole world. This will be very telling. Thank you so much, Manish, for your time. This has been super interesting, very enlightening. I really appreciate it. Do you have any last thoughts that you want to leave our viewers with?
No, I think I enjoyed this conversation. In fact, it is good that this discussion is happening because a lot is at stake, right? So,
Yeah.
see, I mean, a couple of things I want to mention is that what we're talking about is credibility, right? How do you build credibility and trust in the discourse and what you see, right? And and that's what we are trying to solve for. And there's no
Yeah.
easy way, but there has to be an approach, and you have to try a few things and see
Yeah.
which one works better. And the point you made about user understanding is also a very important point. Typically, we get caught up in the technical details, but how do you ensure that a normal person walking on the street, when they see a video or a picture, what do they need to know to figure out what to trust and what not to trust? And that's a very important part that has to be also looked into. And I think that's where I think the rubber will hit the road. So and I
Yeah.
just want to end by saying that democracies don't fail when lies spread, right? They fail when citizens stop believing that truth is even possible, and that's a real problem with deepfake. That today you see something and you just feel like, okay, can I trust this or not? And if you start doing that for everything, then there's no shared reality. There is no basis for you to make a
Yeah.
decision, and that's a real problem, right? So yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll hope that we can avoid that or mitigate that.
Yes.
But in the
Good.
meantime, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine.
Awesome. Okay.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.